Welcome to Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase. Brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com. Alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. And now, here's your host, Rob Chase.
Hi, this is Rob Chase with Cutting to the Chase, brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com, an alternative news and opinion source for the Inland Northwest. Today our guest is Trenton Miller. Trenton is with Fair Vote Washington, and he has a different alternative way of voting that I think has a lot of good possibilities. We used to call it instant runoff voting, but today it's called ranked choice voting, and it would keep us from wasting our vote. We always say, well, I'd like to vote for this guy, but I have to make the pragmatic decision and vote for the lesser of two evils. So go ahead, let's cut right to the chase, Trenton, and tell us all about ranked choice voting.
Absolutely, yeah. So thanks for the intro, Rob. Thanks for having me here. So ranked choice voting is a alternative method of voting, is a better method of voting where instead of being limited to voting for a single candidate, you actually have the opportunity to rank your options. So you can say, this is my first choice, my second choice, so on and so forth. And it really has many benefits, but one of the primary ones you brought up is the ability to vote for the person that you want and not have to think strategically when you're making your decisions about who you're going to vote for.
Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if we've got, like in Coeur d'Alene, they've got 5 sheriff candidates. Of course, it's is it nonpartisan? I think it's Republican and Democrat, but there's probably an independent in there. There might even be a libertarian in there too. But how would that work from that race then?
Well, so say if you're the person who really likes that libertarian candidate, but you're worried that the majority of people want to vote for either the Republican or the Democrat candidate in that race, you might not want to waste your vote on the libertarian candidate because your second choice may be the Republican. In that case, if you vote for the libertarian, you are removing a vote that the Republican candidate would have gotten, thus giving the person on the other side of the aisle a better chance at winning and potentially hurting your goal of electing the candidate that you like the most in the end. So you might go libertarian as your first choice, Republican, independent, so on and so forth. And throughout the system, would you like? Should I explain how we count the ballots?
Well, let's wait to that. Anecdotally, I did run as a libertarian. I ran for Congress as a libertarian, and you had a Republican, a Democrat, and then me as a libertarian. I think I would have done better if we'd had ranked choice voting, because a lot of people said, well, I like you, I like what you have to say, we need to have change, but I don't want the Democrat in, or I don't want the Republican in. So I got like 5% of the total vote. But if ranked choice voting, a lot of people could have put me first, and then maybe if they wanted the lesser of two evils is a Republican, then their second place choice would have gone to the Republican, because the low guy gets thrown out. And this state, Washington State, we have top 2 forward anyway. So, and it didn't have to be a libertarian. It could have been an independent. There's a guy, Dave Wilson, that ran as an independent, and he actually did pretty well. I think he got like 15%, compared to my 5%. And that was a couple of years ago running against Kathy McMorris. Mm-hmm. But it could be a Green Party person, for instance, too, because a lot of people complain about the Hegelian dialectic, which is, you've got thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, so if you see both parties as evil and out of touch with the people, and, it's politics, you want to make change, but they can't make change because they're following party leadership, well, then I think ranked choice voting would be appropriate in that, because, hey, maybe 90% of the people want me, but they're afraid to vote for me. They could put me first, and then, I might win outright. Because I think, as I recall, the computers, whatever method, I'm sure it have to be computers that use this, they take the first tally, and whoever the low man on the totem pole is, they throw him out, And then his second place votes go up until you finally have a majority, I guess, with one person. Is that how that works?
Yeah. So just to go back before we get into that, I think what you demonstrated there when you with your runs for as the Libertarian candidate and Dave Wilson as an independent really shows the problem with our election system, and that is that it discourages candidates from running if they are not one of the two primary parties. If you look across our country, the overwhelmingly majority of elected officials who hold positions are either Republican or Democrats, and that's because our system is set up to discourage independents, Green Party, Libertarian, or whatever other parties.
They don't want anybody rocking the boat.
Exactly. Yeah, and these people who might run on different platforms have a reason for running as a different party because they disagree from different views. They come at it from a different point of view, and we should encourage that in our electoral system and in our governmental system.
Well, I think we need idealists to help turn the ship of state around because it's going the wrong direction. Now, the founding fathers, if they'd been realists, they probably would have stayed as Tories. But they had idealistic vision, that was okay. What is a proper source of government through all the readings of governments, back in Athenian and Roman times and through the Middle Ages, and they were able, since they're all educated, I think their education was a lot better back then than maybe it is now. But they're able to come up with the Constitution, which, if done right, I think is perfect. But it doesn't say anything about parties, in the Constitution. Yeah. But that seems to be like how it formed itself,
Yeah, parties are just the natural growth of the way that we hold our elections. Mm-hmm. And the unfortunate thing now that we find ourselves in is parties dominate our elections. And if we want to change that and get us out of this gridlock that we see often coming from the two-party system, we need to change our election system to improve that. So to go back to your earlier question about how it works, it's really pretty simple. So people rank their candidates, and we collect all the ballots. It doesn't have to be done by a machine, though it can. It'll make it faster. And what you do first is you tally up all of the first choice votes. If a candidate has more than 50% of the first place votes, that candidate is the winner. They have the majority amount of votes, and it's just like any other voting system. It's just like our voting system now. However, if no candidate has more than 50% of the votes, which happens very often in our electoral system, especially when there's a strong third-party candidate, what we then do is we go and we find the candidate who received the least amount of first-place votes. We eliminate them, and everybody who voted for them, their second choice gets reallocated. Mm-hmm. And we do the same thing again. Now we count up first place votes and the second place of that candidate who is eliminated and see if someone has more than 50% of the vote. And this keeps going, so if there's 7 candidates, you might eliminate the bottom 3 before someone actually has more than 50%, and at that point you have a winner.
So this will only be effective in this state in a primary, then? The general, since we have the Louisiana method of top two forward after the primary, you wouldn't need it for that. But if you had like 100 guys running, for office, then it would come into effect before the primary.
Well, you could really implement it a number of different ways. Okay. I think the simplest way here in Washington State, as far as where would we start, would be to implement it on the primary and get us to this point of use it in the primary, have the top 2, and then they could move on to our current system for the general election. Mm-hmm. But one of the great benefits of ranked choice voting is that it can actually allow you to eliminate primaries altogether. If you wanted to...
That's true.
Yeah, if you wanted to just say, okay, we have 6 candidates, let's just run all the way up to the general election and hold the ranked choice voting election then, you can decide the winner with ranked choice voting. You have no need to thin the pack early on. And if you're looking at government from a perspective of how can we save money, elections cost money. They cost a lot of money to operate. And so if we can find a system that allows us to eliminate the primary, then that's a good way to cut costs.
We'll save money, of course. Yeah. And then all the money going for campaigning to.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, some of this to buy the election, and as people do buy the election, as we've seen, that would the primary costs money to run. So if the parties themselves did ranked choice voting, to say within the Republican Party, we've got 5 guys who want to go for Congress, let's do it, and then they present their guy at the general and get rid of the top 2 thing, and then any other party could do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and that's one of the problems too within the party. Okay, you see, a D or an R generally. Well, a Democrat could be, he might be way to the left or way to the right, but he's got the D behind his name. Same thing with a Republican. So, we have so many, I hate to say it, low information voters that they are wooed not by the principles or the strategy or the what the candidate believes, because you really don't get to hear. Most people don't even pay any attention to it until it comes to the time to get their ballot out filled out. But you could have someone who's more principled, that would appeal to a lot of the people, right? Because now because it's marketing companies, I think, that give you your candidate, and we've seen that. If one candidate, he behind the scenes, he say, well, I'm going to do this and this and this for the powers that be, but you don't know that. He knows what to say. There's actually an organization, it's a Christian organization called We Believe We Vote, and then I've seen them rank people that I think were terrible sinners, way up there 5 stars because they know what to say. Well, then, I'm going to vote for that guy, get out the Christian vote, or the opposite too, but you don't know really who someone is. But I think it helps democracy work better.
Absolutely.
Because then I think we actually could make change. Not that we always have to say this. We live in a republic, not a democracy, but we live in a democratic republic. So the beauty of our system is we have it expresses the general will of the people, but safeguards the rights of the minorities. With the amendments following the rule of law, which is the Constitution too. But I'm kind of getting off track a little bit on that. I'm just kind of there's a dilemma here. How do we get away from it? In fact, I had even friends tell me, well, I'd love to vote for you, Rob, but I can't because I don't want to, again, waste my vote. Yeah. Or your party believes this certain thing, you want to, legalize drugs and prostitution. I said, no, I want to follow that's up to the states, anyway. So I think it'd be a better education for people. They would probably pay closer attention if they thought their candidates even had a chance. And they may even run themselves because people, I've got a family to feed, I've got, a low budget, but I've got great ideas, I want to turn the country around. But why bother if you're going to get outspent, 100 to 1 in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. A few points you mentioned that our system should be generally reflective of the will of the people, and that's one of the big problems that we have right now. Is often that it's not,
because everyone's complaining. Yeah. I mean, it's supposedly the will of people, but no one. I mean, Congress has such a low rating; it's almost in the basement.
Yeah, and a lot of people feel disconnected from their election system. They feel like their vote doesn't matter, and a lot of that is because of the way that we vote. You mentioned that the parties could run this as an opportunity to pick someone, could use ranked choice voting in their own primaries to determine their candidate, and many of the parties are. The Utah Republican Party is using it within their own election system, and then I think it's about 6 states now are planning on using ranked choice voting for the Democratic primaries for the 2020 election. And so it's really building up steam across the nation, really many other places, but we can get to that later. One other thing I was going to say, and I don't quite recall. So,
well, in my case, I ran in 2002 for Congress, and I actually got to go to the general because that was before they had the top 2 forward. I think the legislature changed, so you only had to get 1% to qualify for the general. So I'd gotten 5%. So I actually got to be on stage with George Nethercutt and Bart Hagan and then myself, and I even have the video of that debate, from 2002 on my website too. But it was fun. It gave you a chance. I'm like, any child can grow up to be president of the United States. Well, not really. When the cards are all stacked against you, it would take like a miracle. And a lot of people say, well, it was a miracle. Trump had never held office before, but he had $1 billion. And he had the strategy of tweeting around the press too. So a lot of things come together. But most people don't have that kind of money. But I think that there's a lot of good ideas that are out there for solving the dilemma we're in. But the dilemma being, our country actually is technically bankrupt, insolvent. And that's after all these years, all this effort of listening to people and taking part. So the other thing too is, I believe in getting out the vote, but getting out the informed vote. And I think more people would pay attention if the candidates they liked were in it, because it's always the same guys again.
Yeah. Being able to encourage people to vote, people who feel like their vote matters, is a big benefit of that. And you mentioned getting out the vote. If you have a system where more people are encouraged to run, like you mentioned, they actually feel like their candidacy has a chance. They feel like they can run against these larger parties and they have a chance at winning. That gets more people out knocking on doors, talking with voters, talking about the issues, and overall gets more people involved in the process, our election process. And so having a system that encourages more people running and not less is a big benefit.
Well, we get a better choice.
Yeah.
We have more alternatives of choice in that kind of a system. But as far as the logistics of doing, this voting method, paper trail, is that hard to go, if you have to have a recount? How do you do that?
Well, we would still use paper ballots like we do here in Washington State.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't change that anyway, so you're still going to have the paper trail. The only difference is the way that we count. And you may have multiple counts in the instance of, if nobody has more than 50% of the vote, then we would have that second count where we would eliminate the candidate and do another count. But that doesn't change how we collect. We just use the paper ballots and count the same way that we are. Logistically, the only primary difference is the voting machines that we use to count the ballots right now. We don't hand count the ballots. We use a machine that runs through and processes them. And so certain machines are not set up to be able to handle ranked choice voting. And so an upgrade in election machinery, a ballot counting machinery, would be really the only necessary piece. And that's something that we should do every few years anyways, because it's good to have the newer, more sophisticated technology for reasons of, beyond just being able to count these ballots, but election security, being able to prevent problems along those lines as well. So it's really just an upgrade in software that is the only thing that's necessary, and then a change to the ballots.
Well, getting back to the machines, though, there's a lady named Bev Harris who I think she wrote a book called Black Box Voting, but she proved that anything can be hacked, any kind of machinery. And in fact, there were certain cases, especially in California, where it had been hacked. Would instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting, would that be in any way prevent that?
It wouldn't really have any effect.
Okay.
If you can hack a machine that we're using for our current system, you can hack the same machine that we use for ranked choice voting. If your concern is election hacking of the machines and you want to move to just a manual count, you can do that with ranked choice voting as well. So whatever the solution is to our election security problems, we can do that with ranked choice voting as well.
Well, I remember I got involved in this in 2000 when I first kind of got into politics. And at that time, our Spokane County Auditor, Vicki Dalton, had been, I think, recently elected. I don't know if it was 96 or in 2000, but she said it'd be impossible. I think that she was against it. Now, there were... I think Pierce County was able to do that, weren't they? Used ranked choice voting, and was there any disasters, or did it go okay?
I think there's some misconceptions about what happened in Pierce County. There are some. Essentially, what happened is the person who got elected under their ranked choice voting system ended up not being the best
I think I know what that was.
in office.
Yeah.
But the it's hard to correlate the problems of that candidate with ranked choice voting. I think it gets maybe a false equivalence in some people's minds. They ended up repealing it in Pierce County, but it was a single case scenario, and so it's hard to put a direct correlation there.
Now, one thing I'm in favor of is a 51st state. And, I went to Olympia back in 2000 and tried to get the legislature to let us have, ranked choice voting. And they're pretty much all against it because all those people are from the two parties that benefit, from the way things are. But I think if we had a new state, we could get buy-in from a lot of the people that do want ranked choice voting, would be behind it. Right now, I would say it tends to be more Republican than Democrat because the Democrats run the state. So a lot of people here that are Democrats, well, they think everything's okay. But there are a lot of common cause issues, and I think this could be one of them, especially with a large amount of independents and the other parties that want some kind of a change. But I would say one of the first things we could try would be the state name. Okay, now there's different ideas on what would name this new state, provided the legislature and Congress allowed us to have a new state of Eastern Washington, which would be along the Cascade Crest. So 20 counties of Eastern Washington. Right now, the consensus is, well, let's name the state Liberty, because that's what we're after here. Liberty from the west side, who thinks differently than we do. But back when I got involved in this 20 years ago, it was going to be called the Columbia Free State, was another name. And then some people wanted to call it Cascadia, and other people want to name it after like a local Indian chief or whatever. But you could have ranked choice voting for that. I think that would actually show, hey, this actually can work.
Absolutely. And, one of the ironic things about ranked choice voting is often the opposition just comes from whatever party is in power. And so in some cases, in a state like Washington, you might have more opposition from the Democrats, who are often in power. But if you find yourself in like Idaho, it might be the inverse, because it's really a lot of the concern from the two parties is that this is going to weaken their control overall. And so being able to introduce candidates from third parties or candidates with differing viewpoints is always a threat, but I think overall it helps the people elect who they want to represent them.
Well, I think what's nice about you, Trenton, is you're young, of course. We're always trying to get younger people involved, but you're thinking outside the box already. What was your Damascus Road moment? That, hey, I don't like the way the things are. Let's try this instant runoff voting.
Well, I think a lot of it for me came from, I wasn't very involved in politics or just general civics for most of my youth. Until about a year and a half ago, I started paying attention to issues, and I looked at some of the more common issues, some of the ones that a lot of people are very concerned about, and there are things that concern me greatly. But it became obvious very quickly that none of these issues are going to be fixed until we fix the core of these problems, and that is how we elect the people who make these decisions. We sit in gridlock within our national government and sometimes within our state governments, often because of the people who we elect and the party system, and being able to change that and reduce some of the conflict within our national government by making changes to the way that we elect our representatives could have cascading effects upon any issue that you care about. If you care about immigration, you're going to see progress on that. If you care about healthcare, you're going to see progress on that, because now our system of government doesn't work great because of the way that we elect our officials.
Well, we have so many laws. In some ways, I think gridlock is good. At least we're not passing more and more laws. I mean, it's like semi-loads of laws. I mean, you almost everybody's guilty, if they really want to get down to it, of not filling out their taxes properly. And in fact, they did have a survey where they got different answers from different people at the Internal Revenue Service on questions too. So I think we need to get back to simpler things, like starting with voting. How they get there in the first place is more important. But the nice thing about a 51st state is we've got a blank slate. So I think there are a lot of common cause issues. For instance, even though I'm a Republican, I'd be all for a state bank. But most of the Republicans don't like the idea of state infrastructure bank. And I think healthcare, for instance, I think more competition in healthcare. And there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution about health, education, or welfare. So anything not in the U.S. Constitution per the 10th Amendment belongs to the states. So really the states is where it is at. The states created the federal government. The states created the counties. The counties are subdivisions of the states. So what's important is the state itself. And that's, I think, where we have to begin, so you're on the right track. Have you been to Olympia at all and lobbied for this?
I actually haven't.
Okay.
We do have a bill in the state legislature that is working its way through. I was new enough to this movement, and Olympia is so far away from Spokane.
Yeah.
It's kind of a pain.
All the more
to
reason
get
for a
myself
51st state.
over there.
Capital might be Moses Lake or
so
something.
it's a long drive. So when I first came on board, the bill was working its way in the legislature, but really we wanted to just start building information and informing people here on the eastern side of the state, and so that has been my primary goal so far. And we're going to be picking up in the legislature in 2020, and we'll see how that goes.
Where's it at now? You said the bill's in.
It's in the Appropriations Committee right now.
Okay, so it's passed a couple committees.
Yes, it passed I believe the first committee.
Okay.
And that was this year, 2019. And so we're in appropriations right now, and that is a local options bill. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't enact ranked choice voting. What it does is it gives cities and counties the opportunity to adopt ranked choice voting if they would like. Mm-hmm. Right now we can't. Our system is specifically our top two primary system, and so this just gives more ability for the voters to choose the way that they run their elections. Mm-hmm. And so that would be great, and we are working on pushing that. But if one of the problems of getting a change to the election system passed through the state legislature is you're essentially asking the wolves in the chicken coop, or the fox in the chicken coop, to change their own system that got them elected. And so often that is a very difficult process. So our alternative, if we can't get this passed through the state legislature, we're going to look at a statewide initiative.
Those are hard to do.
They are. The state of Maine is using ranked choice voting statewide.
Right.
And the way that they got that passed was through a statewide initiative. They passed it in 2016. Their state legislature tried to repeal it, and they offered what's called a people's veto, where they can use an initiative to veto a state legislature bill, and they successfully did that with even higher percentage of support than the original initiative. And so last year in 2018 was the first year anybody in the federal government was elected using ranked choice voting. We have 2 Congress persons from Maine elected with ranked choice voting.
Did you find there's one party that's a little bit easier to deal with than the other party?
I think it really
because I found a lot of the Democrats at least seem more sympathetic to it than the Republicans did.
I think at this moment that's what we're seeing in Washington State, but these things can change very quickly, especially because it's not an issue that is really seen as partisan. Like I mentioned before, a lot of it depends on the state that you're in, where the primary opposition comes from. And so
now, does your group Fair Vote Washington, are they across the spectrum politically?
Yes, we are all-inclusive. We're nonpartisan, nonprofit. We are open to anybody who wants to come in and support. We hope to have any of our supporters reach out to the legislators and ask for support of this.
So, you got involved, at one point, I might say you're still younger. I didn't get involved till my 40s, and suddenly, I woke up, why are things the way they are? And that's when I got the internet. I started reading about all this stuff that I'd never learned in civics class, or heard on the mainstream news. But that's why we have to have alternative stations, like this, to get the word out, to let people not just have one line in a
Absolutely.
newspaper column, but to be able to make the case, for something like this. Are there any other things that you're looking that you've become interested in statewide? What are your solutions?
As far as
Trenton Miller.
Me personally, I think there's a number of things that we can do to improve our election systems, which will have the effects of cascading beyond to other problems.
What do you think about the mail-in ballots? Would you prefer to go back to the polls like you used to?
I'm actually split on this.
Huh?
I think mail-in ballots are a great idea because I think it's great to have paper trails for the way that we vote. As you mentioned earlier, election security problems. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also very convenient for someone to send in their ballot. You don't have problems with single day, if a poll closes early or if someone has to work that day, you don't have some of these problems that you see in other states. And so I am all for some of the benefits. I think the one problem that I personally see with a paper ballot is sometimes it just gets lost in your mail, and there's not as much of that correlation of like, oh, it's election day, I have to go down to the polls and vote.
Well, I like going down to the polls to vote. It was almost like being in a Norman Rockwell painting, doing your patriotic duty.
It's a community.
It was a community, and you could take as a rites of passage your 18-year-old, hey, come along with me, and this is how we do it, and all that. Whereas, I don't know, it's just, well, for one thing, the state constitution, it guarantees, privacy of voting, and yet when they're spread on the kitchen table, these mail-in ballots, you kind of lose that. One thing though that really always got me, and this is a national issue on voting, I don't think they should release any results until Hawaii is done voting and is closed down. Then they can release the votes because, when I went to vote, I voted for Reagan in 1980. Before I ever got to the poll, they'd already announced him as a winner.
Oh wow!
So then you stay home, but it's not the only race that you're voting on too. So I think that's unfair. I don't understand why that hasn't been done. Maybe
Interesting.
Maybe we can get like Morris Rogers to do something. But that's the problem too. Is once you get to that level, the federal, then there's sort of that separation. It's hard to actually get to talk to her. Whereas anybody can go see. Probably get an appointment with their state legislator, and that's where the battle is right now, like you're saying. Anyway, well, thank you so much for being our guest, Trenton Miller. And good luck with everything. Maybe I'll go over to Olympia with you and help you on that. Okay, Trenton, to find out more about Fair Vote Washington, where do they go?
Yeah, you can go to fairvotewa.org. We have a sign up, and so please sign up there. And what that'll do, it'll do two things for us. One, it allows us, when we're talking to legislators, we can show them how many people we have supporting the ranked choice local options bill in their district. And that gives us a little bit more of an opportunity to get some of these legislators on board. And then if we do decide to go to an initiative, it'll give us the opportunity to know how many people we've reached out to, how many people support ranked choice voting in the state, which will help our push there. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for being our guest today, Trenton Miller. You are very illuminating. This has been Cut to the Chase, and let's not forget to pray first.
This has been Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase, where we cover anything under the sun that would be of interest to you, our viewers. Cut to the Chase has been brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com, alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. Don't forget to catch the Sunday edition of Cut to the Chase, where Rob interviews local pastors on Christian perspectives. Until next time, stay in prayer for God, family, and country.